The idea was to translate Atlas Shrugged from English to Ukrainian and to publish this. So during this period, I have prepared some short pieces of this for translation, and after everything finished at Maidan, we agreed to have this book translated, and I was translating the first volume. So that, I believe, the reason why I'm speaking with you on that topic. After that, I was working in the Ministry of Defense, and you will see from my speech today why exactly this area. And I was working there for 5-6 last years in Reforms Project Office. We were doing the reform of procurement, defense procurement system. We were fired, all of us were fired in March of this year when new Minister of Defense was appointed by the government. So that's about me. What I want to talk to you first is that does everybody have read Atlas Shrugged? All 3 volumes, correct? Good. Because one thing that was stated in the last volume, in basically the last probably pages, is kind of an outline of a new constitution of this country, of the United States. Of that version is that state shall not interfere with business, or I don't remember the exact quote, but the idea is that state shall not interfere with economy, with business, and so forth. Ayn Rand, we can assume what vision had Ayn Rand writing down this, kind of how this utopian state should look like, should work. But she didn't only mention this in her works of art, like Atlas Shrugged or other pieces like Fountainhead or else. She also wrote a lot of nonfiction. She wrote a lot of philosophy outlines, philosophy books, newsletters. She had a very big library of what she wrote as nonfiction. When I was in the United States, this is the picture of Thomas Jefferson in Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. When I was in the United States, I visited Ayn Rand Institute, and they showed me a lot of her, let's say, notes, a lot of her books, what she was writing, like on the fields and so on. It was really interesting, and the work they're still doing is really fascinating. One of the books which I strongly recommend for you to read, maybe one of the first, is kind of a footnote to Atlas Shrugged. It's called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. In this book, she states that when I say, and I quote, "When I say capitalism, I mean a full, pure, uncontrolled, unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism with a separation of state and economics in the same way and for the same reasons as the separation of state and church." As I said, what is capitalism? In Capitalism, Unknown Ideal. So I wanted to talk about this for a moment, for a brief moment. Why do you think church separated from the state? It's a non-rhetorical question. Do you have any suggestions in regards to this?
Church separated from the state?
Yes, in the first place.
I think, firstly, when the church wasn't separated from the state, it was like a second state. They regulated the whole process in the state, but after the separation, the church became like connected with religion, and state is the state, and it's a good separation.
Well, yes, indeed. The union of state and church brought only malleable both-way influence. Church used state to wage wars in the name of God, and it still do in other countries, in other regions, in other areas of the world. State, rulers, elites used church to secure their power. And as you know, in the medieval Europe, the rulers, they were sent by God. They were not just kings, they were divine creatures, wherever, and people were forced to believe that by church. So this is a very malleable, both-way influence, which was done in order to fall people in line. Because when people fear, they are in line, and they fear of death, and they fear what comes next. So that's why the development of church, especially Christianity in Europe, the dark medieval times, was to make people fear even more. not just death, but what comes after if they do things differently. And you know how many wars, dynasty wars, and how many else problems was influenced by the church and by the wish of kings to secure the church's permission or endorsement to rule. So it was a very hard connection. But there is, I have to say, there is a lot different study about denominations that left Catholic Church, like Lutherans, like Calvinists, like Protestants, and they. There is a study that argues that exactly their approach to religion made capitalism work in the United States, blossom. So they kind of develop a spirit of capitalism. And there is a book for that, Protestantism and Spirit of Capitalism. It's translated into Ukrainian just quite recently. I also recommend to look at this book to have this kind of both views on like what influence religion had on capitalism, like both the bad one and the good one, and generally for development of civilized societies. I will be referencing to U.S. founding fathers many times because they were very important to Ayn Rand, and they were very important to her philosophy because she basically reinstated what they have provisioned at the beginning of the United States as a state. She was continuing to enforce the ideals, to describe their ideals, and she believed that current society, American society, was drifting apart from those ideas and ideals. And can you have the next slide, please? So what about those ideals and why they were so important to Ayn Rand and how they are actually connected to everything else that she's done and she wrote? In their Declaration of Independence, they proclaimed that, well, you can read, but I want to emphasize that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The note here is that the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that is kind of a cornerstone of everything that comes next. This is probably Ayn Rand's most favorite line from this declaration. Jefferson, who was the biggest advocate of this during the foundation, in one of the letters he wrote that, and I quote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only, not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." The interesting here is that this idea that was written in the Constitution, the big and most important document, came from believers. It did not came from atheists. It did not came from people who hate religion or certain denominations or whatsoever. So they stated that it is anybody's own business what his religion is, and nobody can tell how to exercise it, how to pray, how to do anything. So here comes the roots of individualism, is the freedom of conscience, because everything else comes from this, from mind. So it's freedom of mind. And can you switch back to this another slide? So I have only 2 slides, but they are powerful enough for me to explain. You cannot see here, but it says, against every form of tyranny over the mind. So that's the foundations. Nobody can force people's mind. So that's why individualism. So I belong to myself. Life is the most important value. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So here comes next question. Why do you think the governments are instituted among men at the first place? This is also a question for somebody to answer for the purpose of this meeting today.
Thomas Hobbes believed that governments are the creation of people to stop the natural state of anarchy, so to protect themselves from the anarchy and everybody just of war, of everybody against everybody.
True. And yes, civilization is also a freedom from men, and the governments are instituted among men to bear physical force from social relationships. So if we just imagine if we remember how life looked like before the governments and how it will look like if they vanish, it would be tribal warfare, a gang rule, a mob rule. Nothing can stop this. The anarchy is very naive belief that even if everybody is smart enough, there would be nobody who will come with guns and destroy everything because there would be nobody to protect. So the basic feature of the government, and it is only government's feature, is a monopoly for legal use of physical force against people. So that we delegated our rights to the government for us not to hit each other every day on all the matters that we don't like about each other. So she said, Ayn Rand said, and I quote, "If men are to live together in a peaceful, productive, rational society and deal with one another to mutual benefit, they must accept the basic social principle without which no moral or civilized society is possible, the principle of individual rights." And the basic right here, as we mentioned before, and it is stated in Declaration of Independence, is life. Humans, unlike animals, and she always liked to emphasize that in many of her works, humans, unlike animals, not fit to survive in natural environment, in nature, just by their physical appearance. We don't have claws, we don't have teeth, we don't have enough strength to survive. Any mammal, like any monkey or a big monkey, can defeat any human if he just uses what the nature gave him, not the weapons and other things. What is the difference here between humans and animals? And it may seem like a very stupid question, maybe, but there is a lot of literature and a lot of books and a lot of studies in different fields that actually suggest that there is almost no difference, that they study people from the perspective of their animal side. A lot of studies that say that this is how we should understand the peoples and human and their role in nature and the planet and whatsoever. So that's why I'm asking this. What do you think the biggest difference between human beings and animals?
Humans can think.
Correct.
They have thoughts.
Mind, reason. People, unlike any other living being on Earth, can gather knowledge, transcend this knowledge to another generations, and they can trade. Everything they got from somebody fired the first fire and then traded this knowledge with other people, and it was going back and forth until we created a civilization. Because we gathered a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge was lost, but we were gathering knowledge, and we were trading knowledge, and then we were trading, of course, materials to live our life. So that's the whole basic of her philosophy, objectivism, reason and mind, so that people should deal with one another with no violence, just by mere discussion, debates, and consent, and voluntary agreements between people. The precondition of a civilized society is the bearing of physical force from social relationship and establishing a principle that if men wish to deal with one another, they may to do so only by means of reason, discussion, persuasion, and voluntary agreement. That's quotation. So about life. Everything derives from that. If you have right for life, then you must work to sustain your life. you must, in order to do that, you are entitled to the results of your work. Wherever you did, in order to sustain your life, is yours by right. It does not belong to anybody else until they took it in form of taxes, in any other form of robbery, and whatsoever. This is the precondition for a civilized society and for the state and the government that Ayn Rand were advocating for. A necessary consequence, and it's a quotation, a necessary consequence of a man's right to life is his right to self-defense. In a civilized society, force may be used only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use. But of course, the use of force, even retaliatory, cannot be left at the discretion of individual citizens, because nobody knows how people react, what they think, what they suppose, how they will solve crimes by themselves, and who will be punished and how, because people need objective set of rules that will bear this use of physical force, and that everybody will understand what are the crimes, what should be the punishment, what are the evidence. So all this basic stuff that everybody knows, but we are forgetting to put them in one line. So that is the first need of state, and first task of the state is to create these objective rules. This is the task of the government, of a proper government. Its basic task, its only moral justification and reason why men do need a government. The proper functions of government fall into three broad categories, all of them involving the issues of physical force and the protection of men's rights. The police, the armed services, and law courts. And of course, here is the creation of the laws, so the legislative branch of power. So basically, if you look through everything she wrote, or through Atlas Shrugged, through everything else, the idea is simple. The government is needed only to protect us against ourselves, other people, to protect against foreign invasion, and to set disputes in courts between people, because even two brightest people cannot solve the issues just by two of them, especially if one of them breached the agreement. So there should be a third voluntary part, a third part that will arbitrate this issue. That's it, nothing else. And you can, this is not only her ideas, you can look those ideas from many other economists, for example. One of the books that is also worth reading is The Capitalism and Liberty by Milton Friedman. I think Capitalism to Svoboda. I just read a Ukrainian version, I don't know if the words are correct in English. And basically, what is it, that book is about real problems in the United States from the perspective of the as free economy as possible. And you can see a lot of practical things that he, as the nominee of the Nobel Prize in economics, what he is telling. They were practical. There is not much of a philosophy or like a broader philosophy here, but they're very practical. You can use it like a handbook when you're dealing with certain areas like education or others. So that leads us back to a separation of state and economy. Why do you think it's needed from the perspectives of this philosophy, if we compare this to the separation of state and church? Anybody?
Because people in the government, as we can see even in our state, they have their own interests, and they want to protect those interests. They
Well,
interfere.
yeah. Well, that's easy and that's true. Because this is an improper function of government. Because economy produces. Government cannot produce. I mean, it's philosophically, that's the outcome of when they are not separated. Industry produces, people produce, person produce, government cannot produce, because government is the only thing that has a legal right to use force. Individuals has no right to use force unless it's self-defense. So people produce, But government has an opposite function. It cannot produce. And when it tried to produce, we can look upon the planned economies, it always failed. Because government cannot be an effective manager, because effective management of assets is the business function. And government does not do business functions. It is absolutely not what he tasked to do, and he was never able to do so. Of course, you can force a lot of things to work, but if you look at the outcomes of this management, you see that it failed everywhere where it was possible. And basically, the government and markets are incompatible because, again, market is about voluntarily cooperation and government is about force. When government come to any field, to any industry, wherever, only thing he can do is to regulate, to say what to do and what not to do, and then to enforce if somebody does what he's not supposed to do, and so on. So use force. That only distorts markets. Of course, half-regulated, semi-regulated markets, they exist, they function, but not as good as they can, and not as good as they should. And again, we come back to why those regulations is done by the government. And here we will speak about the individualism and collectivism a little bit on that. So if to speak about individualism and collectivism as the two absolutely different and opposite preconditions of a state, we will see that either people are responsible for themselves. They believe that the life is theirs, as we see from this philosophy, that they can work for their lives, they can provide for their lives, they can do it by themselves. They don't need a big brother to provide something for them. But of course, we know that not everybody like this. And that's why collectivism was always a very easy idea because it was placing an individual, as smallest minority, as Ayn Rand said, under thumb. Because always, when there is a big force, you can easily justify this for the greater good that the collective needed, like people needed. But the big thing here is that there is actually, and it is of course not a big surprise, there is no collective mind, like there is no collective stomach. And Ayn Rand always used to emphasize that. You cannot digest your food collectively, as well you cannot think collectively. And any collective is just a number of individuals. But when we speak about the state building, the government institution, if the collectivism is at the premises of this, even in Ukraine, do you think really Ukraine as a society or as a state is built upon individual values or values of life, liberty and pursuit of happiness? Like, what is the last piece of here? Pursuit of happiness. Everybody has a right to pursue happiness. Nobody is entitled to be happy, or nobody is entitled that state will provide their happiness, their food, their profits, their job, their education. Nobody is entitled to do so for you but yourself. And when it is clearly stated that you can pursue your happiness, you can pursue your profits. But what is happiness? Profit's also happiness because it's the value of your work. And when you work, you want to profit. You want to live a better life. You want to pass on your whatever you gathered upon your life to your children. And it goes generations by generation. Okay, happiness is not only about money, of course, but it is also about that. In our society, in our collectivist ethics that we still have a legacy from the Soviet Union, is that somebody is entitled for you to do so. You have a right not to pursue something, but to have it. So it means that it should be taken from somebody else. Taken from somebody else, it is basically the same what we would do if there would be no government. We will take it by force. But this is a force that's used by the government to extort one people and to give it to the other people. Like that's why Ayn Rand hated the tale of Robin Hood, is that it is taken from somebody who produced and given to somebody who did not. And this is what is behind this collectivism ethics, and this is actually like a church here, because rulers will extort this weaknesses and let's say moral degradation of a lot of people who does not want to have their own to control over their own lives. They want to pass this control somewhere. And it is especially strong here in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, in Orthodox branch of Christianity, that somebody, especially the Russian way of doing things, that somebody will take care of you, and that's the biggest difference. For this kind of study, I suggest, and I brought a few books for you to look. First of all, to read Anthem. Have anybody of you read Anthem? Well, I suggest to do so. It's a very small book, and it is, I don't know how to call it, even a novel probably, right? When there is, imagine the world, when there is no I, there is only we, and you cannot even say I. Everything you do as a collective. And there is the dystopian society when individualism lost, and there's only collectivism, only we, divided into certain classes, certain groups, and do exactly function that is assigned to you by somebody above you, and where that leads to. Really, it's really small. The other thing I want you to look, you can pass it on, the whole idea about selfishness and why selfishness is good, unlike we used to see everywhere, especially in the film industry, that somebody who is egoist, somebody who is selfish, it is always necessary bad thing, and the altruism is always a necessary good thing. But in reality, it is exactly the opposite, because you breathe for your own good, you eat for your own good, you live for your own life. That's egoism. That's selfish, and you don't have to be not that. You don't owe anything to anybody. As a person, as the human, your life is yours. Nobody will live your life, and you cannot live anybody else's life. The individual and the state, the conflict and co-living, it one of the pieces that I was asked to talk about. That would be mostly my takeouts of everything that I read, she wrote. And not only she, because the whole institute, they had a lot of authors that still continue this work. You have maybe seen Yaron Brook. He was in Ukraine many times as a director of the institute. And there is a lot more publications and people who still dedicate their life to explain this philosophy and these ideas. One of the books I also recommend to read, it's written by Yaron Brook and his associate, I don't remember his name, is Equal is Unfair. And it's about this whole trend in American society that there should be an equality. Equality of outcomes, like everybody should be equal in what they have in life, like materially, and nobody can be above the others. This book is quite recent, and it explores this trend and explains that why, on the contrary, inequality is good, because everybody is different and nobody has the same starting capabilities, same starting possibilities of his person, his mind, and so on. That's why there cannot be the same results for everybody. This is a very interesting book. But what we can do as individuals to live in a state that respects our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, there is not much, and there's no magical pill to do so. But the things that always should be done is this clear statement of purpose of the government, individual rights in the Constitution. You probably all read our Constitution. There's good places, there's very bad places, but generally this document, from my perspective, is very outdated, and it is should be rewritten. If we ever want to have a state that respects individual rights, there is so much to try differently there, and we should state that. It should be a foundation clearly stated why we have this state, why it is good for us, because it hasn't for many, many years. Secured right for self-defense with objective laws, exactly. looking deep into all of the assets that ministries have, all of the funds that are delegated and given to those organizations. And that is that we can do already and can do all the time. So that's just for you to think about. And the last piece I want to refer to this topic is capitalism, of course, because as you may already understand, all of that is very much connected, and it always brings us back to the initial value of life and the pursuit of happiness. So there is a question for you. Why do you think that the capitalism is the best system? Do you think so? And if you do, why is that? Why is this the best system for people to live in terms of cooperation between individuals? Any ideas? Please.
So, I consider it the only system because other systems are not sets of rules. As if you describe a system as some term or terminology, right? Like democracy, it's the only system we have. Monarchy, just chaotic transmission of power that's not systematic. Same with economy. Capitalism is systematic one, and it's natural.
Well, capitalism is not that systematic because there are so many different views on that and so many different sets of interference and regulations in markets and capitalism, in capital in general, how you move the capitals around in different countries. In the United States, which is the most capitalistic country, there is so much different regulations, financial regulations, that you can actually wonder if there are still markets. And I forget this book that explains it a bit. It is also Yaron Brook book that explains the crisis of 2008, financial crisis, in terms of in what environment it happened, how much regulations was in the financial sector of the United States when this crisis happened, to answer a question whether it was an unregulated market or regulated market. So generally, capitalism can be, application of capitalism can be different. Monarchies also can be different, like take UK for example. They transmit their power perfectly for the last, I don't know how many 100 years. Yes, of course, they are a democratic monarchy, how we call it, parliamentarian monarchy. But if you take a look into the legislation, it is actually a very good question, because I like UK and we have studied a lot of their examples. Whether that a monarchy, was it a democracy that covered up in the monarchy legacy, and they like it as some kind of sentimentals about their greater past, or that it's actually a monarchy that just have a little bit a democracy on a facade. So basically everything that every authority in UK comes from a monarch. Though it's regulated in a democratic way, the authority is monarch, not the people. So it's kind of interesting how they built the society. What I was talking about, the capitalism, yes. So, yes?
You talk about capitalism, collectivism, they sometimes play unfair. I mean, like, take something from capitalist and in not proper and fair way, and I mean in collectivism system, but and that for capitalism exists too many regulation from government, but another way maybe this regulation create like more fair approach to game of the market. I mean, yes, it could be too many in some way, but another way, some capitalists could play too much in their individualism and think only about themselves and create create not budget but revenue only for themselves, and like split on the general individualism of other people. For example, like when child work on the factory, etc., like in China. So this so that sometime maybe capitalism start to spread in illegal way.
Well, there is another book I recommend you to read. A lot of those questions referenced there. I will just briefly mention. You said that the capitalists can, gather profits only for themselves. For whom else should they gather profits, do you think?
In one way, for their like workers, it could be, but another way, it depends on the who make this profits. I mean, on the attitude of this person. In one way, okay, if they have appropriate rules, for example, like five days, like 8 hours per week, but another way, this profits could be like spread the red line when people work like 24 hours per same week, like this.
Yeah, but nobody forces those people to work at the certain enterprise that gives too much working hours, for example,
But
right?
it depends on their opportunity. If they haven't another opportunity, so they have with only this, for example, factory in the city, they have an opportunity to change something and find another opportunity.
They can move out to this different city. They can move out to a different city.
If they haven't opportunity to move, I mean, rent the house in another city, they haven't. For example, I am from a small city, so we haven't too many opportunity like to move in, etc. Because all we have, for example, this factory or not factory, or maybe this I don't know, different type of business and so on.
So does that mean that if you or anybody else cannot move out, cannot find another job, cannot find another profession, the certain factory and its owner have to do something for you? Are you entitled, or they are entitled to his assets, to his private property, because you cannot move out of the city?
I mean,
For example.
For example, like, and to say that government maybe build some badges that okay, this owner shouldn't like give so much. I don't know. He could make the rules, and it's his business to how an idea how he should like in which way he should build his own business. But another way, he should like be polite in for his or her workers and think also about ethic side.
But don't you think that, well, do you think it is not in his own interest to provide the best environment, to gather better personnel, to have more profits for himself? Does he actually wants to have poor workers that cannot perform the job because they're hungry, because they live in a dumpster, and because he doesn't need a profit? Like, how he can exist if he does not provide a better environment than his competitor, for example, if it is a competitor. If it is not, still, how can he strive for profits if he treats his personnel badly? Where does it actually work? In the free societies, I mean.
And free society it's also like reality and like beautiful world because, for example, we have many examples. The miners which like make a good capital for like rich people, but also they have a problem with their own salary and healthiness, etc.
Miners in Ukraine or miners?
In Ukraine, for example.
Well, almost all of the mines in Ukraine are state-owned, and they are not giving any profits to the state. They're just for employment of those miners. It's just that. It does not give us anything good to the whole economy. It is cheaper to import this coal, for example, from I don't know another part of the world than to have it from Ukraine. But they are employed, and they risk their lives every day, but they did not produce enough to even cover their salaries. So that's why states mines in the UK was privatized by Thatcher, and not only mines. The whole defense industry was privatized. A lot of industries was privatized, because if the mine is profitable, it would be private. If it's not, it only state can manage unprofitable assets, because he can pour money from other areas, from other people's pockets, into certain area that have no profits. So state can rob us to employ some other people, even in a very hard conditions. You also mentioned that wages. Well, it is a big topic. I would not touch it fully here, But from the last debates I read in the United States, there's a trend to let's raise the minimal profit rates, wages from $7 to $15, for example, and everybody would be happy. But the laws of economy is like the laws of nature. You can build a dam, but the river will still flow. It can find a way. You can destroy the river, but what you gain from it. So when you bear somebody to work in this minimal wages, which are, we need bolts and nuts here, and you will do so. But the bigger problem actually here is that why it is actually does not work. Not taking all this moral stuff and should the companies have this kind of a social, how they call it, social responsibilities. Like should the state oblige them to have the social responsibility, or they can do this better without state. Like for example, in assembly line, if you read the book on Henry Ford, how he made up his business, the assembly line was created by him. He provided the better environment for workers than state even dreamt of. He was not forced to do so. He just made a quality business. And state does not even know what it is, well, back then. Only after his example and other examples, United States exactly, the government, they started to use business practices, not developed by the government, not developed for the government, but developed by business, for the business. They started to using them in the government business. When I say government business, I mean the rules and procedures that they operate. The project management approach, the total quality approach, the everything that was done in the business, they started to employ in the government. But at the same time, we still think that the government can tell business what to do if they learn from business how to do stuff. Why does not anything else than capitalism works is that there is a nature. There is a lot of us, thousands of people, thousands of demands, thousands of opportunities. Everybody wants something, whether they know exactly what they want or they just vaguely have a wish list of what they're gonna achieve. And they always express that in their local community, in their town, in their country. And businesses, starting from small to big, they reflect on that. They see what people want, what people need, what their frustration now, what are the trends, and they provide, they buy, they sell, they trade, they create. They can fail very fast, they can succeed, maybe not at the beginning, but in some time. But they are, those businesses and smaller capitalisms, they are amongst the people. When there is a planned economy, there is a central planner who has to know all of that, and he cannot. So that is the actual problem of central planner. You can Google it, or there is a YouTube educational video. It's really interesting. The problem of central planner. He cannot know nor the demands, nor the wishes, nor all the local peculiarities of the prices, in the markets, wherever. He cannot know that. And that's why it always fails. Regarding the morals and all that stuff you mentioned, I would not take your time on that, but it's very interesting. And inequality, equality is not fair. This name of the book also tells a lot about that. And this book, which is about the capitalism unknown ideal, exactly goes to this. How do you say them? Not correct views on certain models, like you mentioned. Again, for example, the work time, like how much time do you work? Do you know how much time people worked before the capitalism, before the Industrial Revolution? Can you suggest?
Also, it could be much more. Also, I know, for example, that GSA, if I'm not mistaken, like until 16 or 17 years, business usually use the child labor, and it was really comfortable for them. But only when government make a legislation to stop that the child should be studying at work, the business stopped to use it, and of course they sacrifice because they lose some money, but government think about the social part in this way.
Okay. So before the capitalism, before the Industrial Revolution, people worked from dawn, from the sunset to the sundown. They work in a very much worse condition than any factory. They barely scratch enough for their lives, and there was no opportunity. You cannot go to another factory or to another city, because if you go to another city, it will be the same. You have to work from the beginning of the day till the end, 20 hours, maybe even more, and work and toil until you die from in a very young age, because it is too hard to live for the whole life like that. It changed only with the Industrial Revolution and with capitals and with capitalism. The same thing with kids, actually. If you read the also interesting book, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. If I'm not mistaken, he was either 10th or 12th, or even more than that, a kid in the family. 4 or 5 his brothers and sisters died because it was impossible to secure enough health for kids. Some of them died in in a working environment, because his I don't know who it was, either his father or some ancestors before, they were doing the wax for candles, and one of his brothers and sisters, they just get into this a barrel of wax and died there, because there was no enough people to look around on them. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that people at that age, before the Industrial Revolution, the most of the reasons for them to have kids is to have a child labor, because they cannot work just 2 people on a farm, their own land, just 2 of them. They cannot have enough money to hire people. The only thing they can do is to breed people and use them in this work. It was, I think, not the better condition than the next one. Then when you say about the kids in the factories, you think about, when you say about that, think about what their opportunity was. They don't have money for education. And especially in that time, when we speak, there was no any government programs on education, or in private schools, and not many people were going even there. Church schools, maybe. What was the opportunity for them? When they work in a factory, they do some, smaller jobs than they can actually do in 12 years or 13 years. The other opportunity for them is to die from hunger. How is it better? And state cannot take care of all the kids there. So when you say about that, the child labor, you just think about the opportunities they had. They were not forced to work in a factory, but it was good for them, especially at the beginning. Then, of course, everything developed, and there was different kinds of jobs, or their parents get more money because they're working in a factory, they afford the education, and so on and so forth. But the child was a labor all the time, and they stopped being a labor in the capitalism system, and not because the government forbade it, but because it was not needed anymore. So that's it.
So do you feel that during the time capitalism could have in some time more pluses and some time more minuses?
Depends on what you evaluate as minus, as its cons, or as its
impact of people on the people life. So, for example, if a child during some time, it would be minuses because they would die from the economy, but during the next time when rise more schools, it would be like more pluses when they go to the school, not to the factory.
But the schools and all the public services come from the profits of those companies. And for them, in order to have opportunity to build the schools, they have take the taxes from the profits, and for that, the factories have to exist. It has to be more and more and more, so that the more of public education can be built. So it is a very connected process. It is not, public schools does not appear from a thin air. But the factory and products basically appear because it's somebody's knowledge, and you say about, like, profit motive and only want profit for themselves. Let's say I'm an entrepreneur and I have a big factory. Yes, I want the profit for myself. I don't owe it to anybody else. And I hire people and they work for me. They work for my idea. They work for my... I take all the risks. If I fail all my life's deal. If they fail, they be fired and they find another job. So all the risks are on the owner of the business. He takes, in terms of, if you imagine this pyramid, the janitor at the end, he received much more actual profit because everything is built. He just came and worked, but somebody has to build it. Somebody has to have an idea, money, connections, good connections, not this corruption connections, but business connections to do something. And it requires, courage. It requires knowledge. It requires a lot of things that those people they don't care to do for themselves. They just came to something ready and they work. So if they don't like it, they just go to another place. So when we speak about capitalism and the businesses, we should think first of all about those who create, who produce. And it is not hands that produce. Of course, hands produce. But first of all, it has to come from here. Somebody has to think what to produce. Well, I'm actually finished with my topics. I'm just having this conversation. So I think we are running out of time.
We are not running out of time yet. We will have now like a Q&A session, guys. If you want to ask something.
Okay.
Some questions about the topic of our lecture. We will still have time for that.
Can I ask for water?
What's your opinion on sanctions, EU sanctions on Uzbekistan or any other country from Central Asia that uses child labor for production of cotton, for example? EU considers it immoral or unethical to use child labor. That's why it bans imports from such countries completely, cotton imports.
Well, I don't know what exact country is that. What the rule they have? Do they have a democracy or do they have some form of dictatorship? Because it's different than. And I don't know what are the opportunities for those kids. Like again, if they work in this factory, and the another opportunity is for them to just sit in some bungalow and wait for death. Maybe it's not that bad. So it is hard for me to evaluate this kind of policies because I, does not dig deep into the current economical, let's say, international relations and what all the preconditions for that. And I'm not telling that child labor is a good thing. I mean, we should consider that what are the opportunities? Are they forced to work or they want to work? Whether they have anything else to do in this society, in this area, in wherever. Because when it started in the Western world, it was like that. There was nothing, and there was something creating here, a factory, for example. What the opportunity to work at the farm, with a very hard work, or to have some money here to work with less intensive work because kids cannot, do all the heavy stuff. So that's why if you want to have the answer for this question, it has to be a certain, investigation on certain case. I'm just telling about the premises, how to think about that. So it is not good for people when kids work when they can do something else, but the situation could be different because something else for them may be just death.
Thank you.
You can give me those books back. You can have them. Some of them are electronic version. Some of them you can order from eBay, as I did. It's not expensive, but they're very interesting. And it's a little bit more than these two books. You can just take a look to explore these ideas further. Thank you.